If you were hunting down a murderer who can kill you from anywhere in the world, what would you do? I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the Death God's game in Death Note 3. This book is going to start a bloodbath. These police officers arrive at a crime scene and find a dead body lying in the street. But Mishima here notices the victim has no injuries. Suspicious, the officer thinks he was murdered by a death note and tells everyone to cover their faces so the killer can't identify them. From their radios, the cops are told that the suspect is a girl wearing a hoodie, and that's when the man notices someone walking through the crowd. She matches the description, and Mishima chases after her. He's about to lose her trail when suddenly more people start dropping dead, and the crowd panics. This confirms that the killer has a death note, and she'll do anything to slow them down. The suspect heads to Shibuya Crossing and begins randomly killing people, leaving a trail of dead bodies. The situation is getting out of control, and with no good options, the policeman draws his gun. The only way to stop this girl is to shoot her, but that's when this man in a mask appears. Taking the killer by surprise, he raises his gun and tries to stop her. She falls to the ground, and the stranger runs over to check on her, but is shocked to discover that she's just been killed. This wasn't supposed to happen, and he looks around, but doesn't notice there's another Death Note user nearby, and he's going to make the cop's life a living hell. Later, Mishima confronts the masked man, furious that he would fire his gun into the crowd, but the detective Ryuzaki explains it was only a tranquilizer dart. That's when the man receives a call and is told that the suspect died from a heart attack. It's exactly how the other victims died, and it's a clear sign that there are more Death Note owners that haven't been caught. The investigators meet up to discuss the case, and Mishima here suggests that the girl had the ability to identify people by looking at their faces, just like the original Kira. 10 years ago, Light Yagami became a legendary serial killer known as Kira, and used the Death Note to murder criminals by writing their names down, but was caught by the police and killed by his own death god. Since then, a new Kira has found a Death Note to continue his work, but the officer knows the girl is now the only suspect, and they need to find out how many users there are before it's too late. Okay, this is out of control. It's been 10 years since the original Kira died, but what's disappointing here is that after so much time, his followers still haven't learned from his mistakes. It should go without saying that using your Death Note in public is a horrible idea, because when someone drops dead, the crowd is going to panic, and if you're the only person acting normal, it's much easier for the police to discover that you are the killer. Now, the only reason a mass murder like this would even be possible is because the killer gave up half of her remaining lifespan in order to receive Reaper Eyes. As long as you can see their faces, this ability tells you the name and death date of anyone on Earth. The cops already know this, but there's one way we can use it to our advantage. If it were me, I would reveal to the public that there's a killer on the loose who can murder you just by seeing your face, and suggest that they should wear masks to hide their identities. But there's another option that could protect the population. One thing to consider is that if the killer can see everyone's names, then the death gods must have rules that determine what a true name actually is. We know that writing down someone's nickname will not kill them, so it likely means that according to the Death Note, your true name is coming from your official government record. If this is the case, then one of the safest methods to prevent an attack like this is to form a new record system where everyone's official registered name is encrypted. You can still use your given name in daily life, but for official documents, you would need to provide your encoded name on a storage device or a safe network. This way, your true name becomes a series of jumbled symbols that would be harder to remember, and if the killer has to write down something this complicated, then a mass murder would be far less likely. Now, this approach might sound extreme, but the alternative is way too dangerous to accept. If one person had the power to kill anyone they wanted, all it would take is a troubled student with a Death Note and a Facebook account, and they would be able to kill nearly everyone in the city. Protecting the citizens by officially changing everyone's names to an encryption would help solve this problem, and as difficult as it would be to organize, it would save a lot of lives in the process. Later, the police go to the vault where they keep the Death Note, and carefully take it out of its case. That's when the detective Ryuzaki suddenly picks it up, and encourages everyone else in the room to touch it as well. They're all confused, but following instructions, they reach towards the book and are shocked to find a massive death god standing behind them. It's terrifying, but one of the cops interrogates the spirit, asking how many other Death Notes are in the world. The death god reveals there are 6 books in total, and it's the most that are allowed on Earth at once. After answering their question, the creature slips back into the shadows as they realize 5 more killers are out there, and if they join forces, it could destroy the world. The next morning, all the computers in the city are suddenly hacked, and they start to play a video of the original Kira declaring he's returned. The investigators are shocked, and the detective points out that nobody knows Light Yagami's face except for the police officers in this room. That means someone here might be a traitor, but they have no idea who made the video. To make matters worse, the hacker broke into their database, so he now has access to the names of the people on this task force. They've been compromised, and afraid of being targeted, some of them leave to make sure they're safe. With the room clear, the detective demands information on this woman, Misa, who is Kira's girlfriend. He's told that she lost her memory after giving up her death note, and the police have been watching her every move. But soon, this woman will go on another murder spree. Meanwhile, present-day Misa is taking a break in her dressing room when she hears a voice telling her to open the present on the table. Confused, the woman opens the gift box and discovers her old death note inside, but when she touches it, all her memories suddenly come rushing back. Noticing the death god Ryuk, she demands to know if Light really is alive, but the creature refuses to answer and vanishes into smoke. Frustrated, she gets into her car to drive home, but that's when she sees a strange origami figure on the dashboard and realizes someone is sitting behind her. The man introduces himself as Shion, Kira's protege, revealing that he created the video that hacked the police and tells her the original Kira is still alive. The woman is shocked, and the man explains that if she helps him gather all 6 death notes, Light will meet her at a secret location only they know about. It sounds unbelievable, but he promises to help her find Kira if she helps him get the remaining death notes. Angry, the woman refuses his offer, and the man exits the car, leaving behind the death note, but soon Kira will strike again. Okay, this is dangerous. We've just learned that there are 6 death notes in the world, and this opens up more opportunities for criminals to get their hands on them. It's a recipe for disaster, but if I were on this death note task force, there's one important factor here we can't ignore. As soon as we track down and confiscate all 6 death notes, they're going to be turned over to the government, but this will only give them more power. If we know anything about history, it's that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and giving a single government the ability to kill anyone they want could be enough to start World War III. That's why Shion here might actually be doing the right thing. Even if he doesn't have the right reasons, keeping these death notes out of the hands of the government could prevent the most unstoppable tyranny the world has ever seen. If the Germans found a death note in the 1940s, they would control the entire world forever, and we have to make sure nothing like this ever happens in the future. That's why if it were me, I would try to collect the death notes on my own and form a secret society to protect them. To do this, we need 5 other people we can trust, and compile a list of the most corrupt and evil political leaders in the world, based on a checklist of certain factors that would be voted on. Then we can use this list and offer a vote on whether or not we should kill any of these corrupt politicians. Now, there would need to be enough total votes to reach a certain threshold, because if only 10 people vote on the poll, then it's not a good representation of public interest. But once the vote count is high enough, we can follow the will of the people. For the first vote, we would demonstrate that it's a real threat and kill a well-known war criminal or dictator. This will pick up media attention, and people will come flocking to the death note polls to submit their vote. As soon as corrupt political leaders hear about this, they'll be terrified of misbehaving, and instead of taking that big paycheck from a lobbyist to block a bill, they might think twice and do what they know is right for the people instead of lining their pockets. Now, this might sound really messed up, and that's because it is, but the one thing it does is swing the balance of power back into the hands of the people. A power like this will inevitably corrupt any user, and that's why the smartest approach is to democratize its power as much as possible, so that there are better checks and balances to keep the government honest. The next morning, this judge sits down at his desk and opens up his death note before writing down the names of Kira supporters. He's furious that anyone would support a murderer, but suddenly a delivery man walks into his office. Approaching the judge, he hands over an envelope, and the guy realizes the sender knows he's a death note user. Terrified, he rips open the package and discovers a letter that describes exactly how he dies. This was all a trap set by Shion here to steal the man's book, and with no way to escape his fate, the judge gives him the death note. Later, the man heads to the police station and tells the receptionist he's got a message for Detective Ryuzaki. The death note task force rushes to the scene, but instead, he reveals that Kira has already killed 3 death note owners, with the judge being the 4th victim, leaving only 1 death note left unaccounted for. The police officers head back to their office, where the detective reveals that he's identified the murdered death note owners, but all their notebooks were missing before the crime scene was discovered. They realize the killer must have taken them, but they're interrupted when a police officer runs in, warning the others that Kira has sent another message. Gathering around the computer, they listen to a voice recording demanding that the detective reveal his identity on live TV tomorrow, or hundreds of people are going to die. They've been outsmarted yet again, but the detective has a clever plan to take back the stolen death notes and catch the killer. The next morning, the news channel reports that the famous detective L has sent a message for them to play on the air, even though he's dead, and the investigators watch in shock as the man appears on screen. He tells the killer to meet him on a website so they can talk, and it's clear that the footage is faked, but this is all a part of the detective's plan. As soon as the man logs into the website, the police are able to track down his location, and one of the investigators comes running in, revealing that the killer is in Tokyo. The task force heads out to arrest the man and arrive at the building where he's hiding, but when they break into his apartment, nobody is there. Looking around, this guy checks one of the rooms, and that's when he finds a note left behind on a table. On it is a message explaining that he will die in this very room, and it's written on Death Note paper. There's nothing he can do to save himself, and the others can only watch as he drops dead in front of them. Okay, these cops are complete idiots. They tried to trick the man into clicking on a website link so they could secretly track his location, but they should have known their plan wouldn't work. We have to assume the killer is smart, so the fact that he actually accepted the invitation to meet online is a sign that his location was fake. There's no way a hacker would manage to take down their servers and spread a message all over the entire world, only to get tricked by clicking on a spam link. Setting their officers to his fake location is the most idiotic plan I've ever seen, and considering that this detective is L's protege, he has a lot of explaining to do for this mistake. Now, if they were thinking carefully, they would have realized there might be a better way to trap this killer and get what they want. These detectives are completely forgetting that since they have a Death Note in store, it's inevitable that he'll either try to break in or has planted a double agent to steal it from the inside. With this in mind, I would secretly switch the real Death Note with a fake copy without telling the rest of the department. That way, no one can leak information that it's been replaced, and if the killer tries to steal it, he won't know it's fake until it's too late. Then, we use this Death Note to go undercover and start killing criminals throughout the city. This will alert the hacker because he'll notice a series of Death Note killings that weren't committed by him. That way, we can use the streak of murders to claim we're supporters of Kira and request to meet with them so that we can work together to change the world. Since he has 4 notes in his possession, while the police have 1, he will think we have the 6th and final Death Note, and that means he'll do anything to track us down. Now, it's definitely a risky strategy, but there's one reason it has a good chance of working. From what we've seen, it's safe to assume Shein here doesn't have Reaper Eyes, because he's already a genius hacker. He can easily get people's names from databases, and wouldn't want to sacrifice half his remaining lifespan for a skill he already has. It's also important to point out that so far, he's only killed 1 officer from the task force. If he did have Reaper Eyes, there would be nothing stopping him from killing everyone in the department, and since most of them use pseudonyms in the files he hacked into, it's reasonable to assume that he doesn't know our names. With this in mind, meeting him face to face is worth the risk, because he wouldn't be able to see my true name, and we can ambush him, take his death notes, and finally complete the mission. Sometimes to get the job done, you have to work outside of the law, and it's going to force the new killer to respond to us instead of the other way around. This makes him the predictable player instead of the cops, and that's a lot better than the situation they're in at the moment. Meanwhile, the detective continues talking with the new Kira, who demands Ryuzaki hand over the death note they have in their possession, but the man refuses, and the killer threatens to go on a murder spree unless he gives up the notebook. The detective agrees, but the man doesn't realize that he's walking straight into a trap. After the detective leaves, Mishima remembers there was something strange about the video of L, and suddenly has a brilliant idea. Analyzing the data, he finds a hidden message that says, "I own the last death note," and that means the detective must be keeping a secret. That night, Ryuzaki arrives home to find the death god Arma waiting for him, but something's wrong. That's when he turns around to see Mishima with his gun pointed straight at his head, and realizes he's just been caught. The man accuses the detective of being the new Kira, and demands that he surrender his death note, and with no other choice, Ryuzaki leads him to his storage room. He hands over the book, but when the police officer checks the pages, Mishima discovers that they're all blank. The man can't believe what he's seeing, and accuses him of tearing out the used pages, but the detective explains that he made a promise to never use it under any circumstances. The cop doesn't trust him, but the man insists he's telling the truth, and reveals he's got a plan. They will use the last 2 death notes as bait to draw out the new Kira, and it will give them a chance to steal all of his books. It's risky, but wanting to put a stop to this killer, Mishima reluctantly agrees, and gives back the death note before leaving the building. Walking outside, he's suddenly confronted by police officers, and they order him to come in for questioning. With no idea what's going on, he's taken to an interrogation room where the police officers reveal they found information that the original Kira had a son who was being raised by Misa's lawyer. This is information that Mishima should have reported after his investigation was complete, and the man insists he's being framed, but they don't believe him. The police suspect he was hiding it on purpose and make it clear he'll be kept in confinement until he reveals everything he knows about the real Kira. Okay, this guy is a top G. He's been keeping the 6th Death Note to himself the entire time, and even turned this Death God into his housewife. The only problem is that he made one huge mistake. If we're already working outside of the law by keeping a secret Death Note, then it's only logical that we should get to use it for our benefit in the least harmful way possible. What everyone seems to forget is that a Death Note can be used for a lot more than just killing people. If it were me, I would look for a very old billionaire and write his name in the Death Note, so that I end up inheriting all of his money. Now, in order to do this, it needs to seem random, because it's extremely suspicious if he gives all of his money away to a detective who just so happens to be investigating Death Note murders. That's why we have to make it look like it's pure luck, and the best way to do this is to set up a fake lottery. I would write in the Death Note that before this old billionaire dies, he calls his lawyer to change his will, saying that he made all of his money because he was a lucky man, and wants to give away his money to someone else who's just as lucky as him. He will then add in his will that he wants a national lottery, where citizens can pick 10 numbers, and if all of them are correct, they will win his entire inheritance. This makes the odds of winning astronomically low for the average person, but the great thing is that since we are using the Death Note to make him write this will, we can also choose the correct numbers for ourselves. Then when the man drops dead, we can submit the correct lottery numbers, and they'll have no choice but to give all of his cash to us. As long as he's old enough to die of natural causes, and we destroy the Death Note page with his name on it, there's no reason anyone would suspect that we were the killers, and we'll be rich beyond our wildest dreams. If Detective Ryuzaki had taken advantage of this, it would have been much easier to convince the police officer to help him carry out his secret plan, because he would have so much money to bribe him with that it would be an offer he couldn't refuse. The next morning, the detective visits the investigator in his cell, but the man is furious. He accuses Ryuzaki of framing him for covering up information, but this was all part of his master plan to catch the new Kira. After setting the police officer free, they go to the storage room where the Death Note is being kept, and he orders Mishima to hand it over. With a gun pointed at him, the investigator puts it inside the detective's briefcase, and the man explains that he's going to meet with the new Kira in person. Realizing the officer doesn't trust him, the detective hands over his gun and dares him to shoot. That's when he pulls out a key for the old Death Note task force office, telling the investigator to watch over him today, and Mishima reluctantly agrees. Later, the detective races into town and calls the killer, who instructs him to put a page of his Death Note in a train station locker to prove he has one. Meanwhile, Mishima here starts turning on the computers to monitor the situation when a voice orders him to surrender. But as the man turns around, he sees his colleagues. They're here to help, and he sends them out to support Ryuzaki, but they don't realize this plan is going to fall apart. Arriving at the train station, the detective opens up this locker and puts a page from his Death Note inside. With that done, the new Kira tells him that a page of his notebook was hidden in a nearby bench, and the man heads outside to look for it. Finding the bench, he sits down and discovers a piece of paper has been taped to the bottom. That's when he realizes that a Death God is standing next to him and recognizes him as Ryuk, the original Kira's Death God. The man declares he'll beat the killer just like his mentor L did, and the spirit laughs at him. But this reaction is the clue the detective needs to figure out the new Kira's true identity. Meanwhile, in the train station, a homeless person opens up the locker and finds the paper inside. Confused, he picks it up and notices Arma standing right next to him. The man falls to the ground in shock, confirming the detective brought his actual Death Note, and the killer orders him to wait at City Hall to finally meet him in person. Following orders, Ryuzaki stands in the center of the lobby, searching the crowd for any sign of the killer, but suddenly all the computers at the surveillance center shut down, and Mishima here can't see anything through the cameras. He tries to warn the others, but that's when he realizes someone is blocking him from communicating with the police officers. The man only has seconds to fix this, and he rushes out of the room as fast as he can. Running upstairs, he calls one of the cops, telling her to find the signal jammer while he heads to the server room to check the surveillance footage. Stepping inside, he hears a gunshot and searches for the shooter when he discovers a technician sitting dead in a chair. The man was ordered to hack the servers before being killed by the Death Note, and that means their entire plan has been compromised. Okay, this is a disaster. The killer threatened to go on a murder spree unless they give up the Death Note, and the detective agreed, but this was a horrible mistake. First of all, if this guy is trying to collect all the Death Notes, then he's already planning on killing people, so giving him what he wants isn't going to save anyone. Their plan was to use this opportunity to capture him and watch through the camera so they can identify the killer. But now that the surveillance system is down, they have no way to see his face. Sheehan was extremely clever because he used this homeless man to help prove that the paper was real, instead of doing it himself. He also knew that the detective wouldn't be working alone because the only way to capture him is with backup and video surveillance. That's why he took out the cameras, and in one simple move, destroyed their entire operation. The police should have known this would happen, and that's why there's no way Ryuzaki should be taking the death note to this meeting. If it were me, I would put a fake copy in the briefcase and secretly give the real book to one of these policemen so they can use its power against the killer. Now you might be thinking that using their gun should be enough to do the job, but the problem is that this only gives you a single shot to take him down. If it fails, then the crowd will panic and the killer will escape with all 6 death notes at his disposal. On the other hand, if the police officer makes a deal for the Reaper's eyes, we would be able to find out the man's name and can use the death note to kill him anytime we want. Now this is a pretty big sacrifice, because the only way to get the Reaper's eyes is to give up half your remaining lifespan, but it's definitely worth the risk. If we let Sheehan collect all 6 of the death notes, he'll be unstoppable, and we just can't let that happen. Most of these cops are already middle-aged, and since the average life expectancy of a Japanese man is 82, he will still have 21 years of healthy living ahead of him. If the plan works and we manage to kill Sheehan, we should allow the cop to retire early so he can enjoy the rest of his life in peace. Meanwhile, one of the police officers finds the signal jammer outside and smashes it to pieces, restoring the surveillance cameras, but it's too late. The detective notices Misa standing in the crowd, and she's holding a death note. He points his gun trying to stop her, but she manages to write his name down in her book before he can pull the trigger. There's nothing the others can do to save him, and he falls to the ground dead. Sheehan, the new Kira, quickly takes the briefcase with the death notes inside and leads the woman away. That's when she stops, explaining that she used her Reaper eyes to check if the original Kira is alive, and discovered he's dead. The man stares at her in shock, as she reveals the secret location where Light would be waiting before giving the man her death note. Taking the book from her, he leaves as fast as he can with no idea that Mishima has overheard their entire conversation, and now he knows exactly where to go. The woman notices police officers coming their way, and quickly begins writing their names to kill them one by one. But with her crimes exposed, she walks out of the building and suddenly collapses to the ground. The last thing she wrote in her death note was her own name, and now the new Kira has everything he needs to dominate the world. Later that day, this man arrives at the location where Light is supposed to meet him, but when he enters the building, nobody is there. Opening the suitcase, he takes out Misa's death note and asks to trade half his remaining lifespan for the ability to see anyone's full name. And here is planning on killing the new Kira so he can finally replace him as Light's true successor, no matter the cost. Suddenly, they hear footsteps approaching the room, and Mishima walks in with his gun pointing straight at his head. The police officer demands he hand over the books, but the killer refuses and gets ready to write the man's name in his death note. That's when the detective enters the room, and not only is he alive, but lies, announcing that he is the new Kira. The killer immediately writes Ryuzaki's name into the book, but to his surprise, the man doesn't die. The detective explains that his name has already been written in a death note with a future date, and figured this out when he met Ryuk. The death god laughed at him when he declared he'd beat Kira just like L did, and the creature realized its mistake. That means this death note can't kill him, and he only pretended to die in order to find out who might be a traitor. Suddenly, Sheehan here reveals a shocking truth, confessing that he isn't the new Kira, and that the video he released was a message that the original Kira intended for his son. The investigators don't believe him, but the killer points out that Light's son might be the successor, and was being taken care of by a guardian. That's when Ryuzaki remembers that Misa's lawyer had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and Mishima here was investigating him. The police officer swears he never discovered what happened to the man, but the detective can't trust him, and accuses his partner of giving up ownership of a death note to lose his memory. That would mean he's the new Kira, and the only way to prove his innocence is by touching this book. If he's lying, then his forgotten memories will return to him, and when he takes it from the detective, he remembers what really happened in his investigation. Okay, this is not what I was expecting. Sheehan thought Kira had returned, but he had no idea that his childhood idol was already dead. This whole time, he thought the original Kira sent the video and the death note to him and was chosen to carry on his legacy. But it turns out, this was all manipulation from the Neo Kira who was posing as Light Yagami. Now, we're finding out that Mishima here might be the same person who Sheehan has been looking for this entire time, and neither of them realized it. If the police officer gave up the death note and sent it to Sheehan, then he wouldn't remember anything that happened, and that would explain why and nobody realized this until it was too late. Now with that being said, Sheehan here is an absolute idiot. He's already collected all 6 death notes successfully, and has just found out from Misa earlier that Light Yagami is dead. But if the man was thinking clearly, he'd realize that this is actually a blessing in disguise. If his childhood idol is already dead, then that means there's no reason to come to this secret location, because nobody would be waiting for him there. In fact, it's logical to assume that coming here would actually be the worst thing you could do, because if anybody's waiting for him, it would be the police. He's just fled the scene of a crime with cops watching everyone on camera, so there's a very high chance he was being followed. Any smart criminal would have taken more precautions in a situation like this, and spent several days trying to lose a potential trail, instead of leading them into a house with no good way to escape. Since he already has all 6 death notes, he should have realized that there is no other Kira, and he's now free to do whatever he wants. If it were me, I would have left Japan and started a new series of killings from a country that had very weak and corrupt institutions, because it means the government and police force wouldn't be organized well enough to stop us. I would also make sure I chose a country that did not have extradition agreements with Japan, and since my criminal activity would be happening from a third world country, the rest of the world would be a lot less likely to intervene. This would have been the best way to escape the police and eventually dominate the planet, but instead, he walked right into his own trap. Sheehan's biggest mistake was not having a plan B, and now the cops can confiscate all of his death notes, locking him up for the rest of his life. When the detective joined the Death Note task force, Mishima knew he was in trouble and came up with a plan to cover his tracks. First, he found out the man's identity using the Reaper's eyes and wrote down his name in the Death Note. Then, he modified the video that Light made for his son and instructed Ryuk to give both of them to Sheehan. That way it would seem like he was the new Kira and no one would suspect him. Snapping out of his memories, the man looks around in horror as the others realize they found the real Kira, and that's when a helicopter appears behind them. It immediately fires into the buildings, and the men take cover, dodging out of the way in the nick of time. The detective realizes that the government has tracked them down to confiscate the death notes, and seeing his opportunity to escape, Sheehan runs out of the room, but a SWAT team is on their way to slaughter them. With no good options left, the man asks the Death God for help as he pulls out a page from his death note and decides to fight his way out of here. Suddenly, the SWAT team members' helmets start flying off and expose their faces, letting the killer write down their names. The men start dropping dead, but it's not enough. More gunmen enter the building, and the killer runs back into the room, but someone shoots him from behind at the last second. Trying to save him, Mishima rushes over and drags the man's body to cover, but the killer is bleeding out. He won't survive for much longer, and knowing that he's going to die, hands over the briefcase with the books inside. The investigators manage to find another exit and leave the man for dead, making their way through an underground sewer system to escape. But to their surprise, their colleague is waiting for them. She reassures the men that they won't be killed, but then the woman drops a truth bomb on them, revealing she knows Mishima is the new Kira, and he murdered her brother with his death note. Furious, the policewoman aims her gun at him and fires, but the detective jumps forward, taking the bullet. There's no way out of this trap, and the new Kira accepts his punishment, regretting everything he's done, but to his surprise, the woman suddenly falls to the ground dead. That's when he realizes that the Death God has written the woman's name in her book and begins to disintegrate into dust. It's the punishment for any Death God that saves a human life, and the police arrive to take them into custody, making it clear they won't escape. The next morning, Ryuzaki enters a prison cell where Mishima is being kept in confinement. According to the Death Note, today is the day that the detective will die, but there's a problem. When the Death Notes were being transported for containment, the vehicles were hijacked, and while 4 of the books were destroyed, 2 have gone missing. New victims are already dying from the stolen Death Notes, and someone needs to be there to stop them. The detective gives the man his notebook, revealing that he'll release Mishima and let him take on his identity to hunt down anybody following in Kira's footsteps. It's the only way to keep the world peaceful, and wanting to be free, the investigator agrees. He walks out of the prison, determined to save as many lives as he can, with no one noticing that the guy walking out looks nothing like the guy who walked in.
But what do you think? How would you beat Death Note 3? Let me know with a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for more videos like this. Until next time, have a damn good day.